Hello everyone, this is Peter Sarstedt with Jonathan on Retrospectives, 3 SER KC Radio.
But where do you go to, my lovely, when you're alone in your bed?
Would be your main memories of growing up in India, and were there any signs there that music was going to be an important part of your life?
Yes, I think so, because of my two elder sisters who were a little bit older. They were sort of young teenagers at the time when I was about 11, so let's say they're sort of about 7 years older. And so they were, at that time, let's say around about the 50s, that they're picking up on all that early pop stuff, the Johnny Ray kind of stuff, the pre-Elvis sort of pop, crossing into a kind of Sinatra and anything which was, I suppose, considered pop at that time. But so they were always influencing us by, we'd sort of wander into the room and then you'd be hearing some of their music. So I was always interested in the songs themselves, and I can remember laughing my head off at one of them, one of those early 50s stuff, so Guy Mitchell or something, and thinking what a cute, way to do things, because, how does it happen to syncopate that way? So my earliest memories of listening to music are, how do I do that kind of thing,
Yeah.
I wanted to take it apart in a way to try to make it myself. It's a bit like undoing a clock when you see one as a lad. You think, well, what's behind it?
Yeah.
That kind of feeling was around with me. And not necessarily my two brothers, but that's the way I felt, I think.
Of yourself and your brothers, who was the first to get serious about music?
I think that my elder brother, Rick, or Eden Kane as he later became, was very keen to get entertaining. He seemed to be, he had all the credentials at school, like all the girls were after him anyway, so he didn't really need to be in a pop band. He had them sorted anyway. But he sort of automatically became a front singer so very early on, whenever there was any kind of skiffle group going, or anything that was going to happen. On a musical level, he was there to be in the front, because I think basically he just loved getting on stage. And he was also a very talented, natural kind of singer, so he could just sort of pick up music very easily. It wasn't that easy for me. I don't think I've got a completely natural ear as he has. For instance, I think he can play the harmonica without ever having sort of learnt it. He could play any song on it immediately, which was, in my book, is a sort of natural musician. So he was the first one, and then I gradually sort of got in behind him somewhere.
Did you and your brothers share musical tastes as such, or did you influence each other musically?
I think we were... It was... In those sort of middle 50s, you're driven by, all of a sudden, rock and roll has arrived. And that is a front line, for guys who are interested in image. But at the back of it lies a kind of all that music, the Brunsey, an American folk blues music, which was also coming to England at that time. And I was interested in that, in a kind of trad world as well, which I don't think my brother was. He was interested in the Elvis image immediately. But I was sort of underneath it, thinking, who are these guys? What's happening there on the Brunsey and those other artists just up there? I can't think of all the names. Josh White is one of them. And so I was sort of I had a different set of friends to him, I think. This is where it came out. So the influences were coming along, and I'm trying to widen them out, and he's focusing in on Elvis.
What do you think it was about? Sorry, what do you think it was about blues and folk music that steered you in that direction?
Well, it was, I think a kind of lifestyle thing. After I'd read at school as a sort of young lad this wonderful book, The Autobiography of a Supertramp, it was, it's about a sort of Woody Guthrie figure tramping around America, so going on the trains, the freight trains and things like that. So he's a kind of vagabond character. and it fitted in with those early ideas of the beatniks, which were like filtering through into the underground over here. So I had some friends who were into modern jazz who were trying to turn me onto that hard bop and a lot of instrumental jazz music. So the folk thing entered that area by the time I was about 15 or 16. But at this time, Elvis is really making inroads into the popular scene. But in my set, he wasn't considered, he was sort of looked down upon. You think, oh, God, rock and roll, that's not happening. It's really the guys in the jazz club with the polo neck sweaters. They're the ones who were hip. So I kind of went along with that thing, this thing with the folk. So I felt that was more important.
Was there the romantic notion of being a folk troubadour that appealed to you?
Yeah, well, I think more of a Supertramp idea. I mean, I was looking to hit the road, really. And I think by about 1958 or 59, the Jack Kerouac books had arrived, and all this was beginning to formulate a bit more properly. But at the same time, I'm with my brother all the time. I'm looking to help him out in a way, and also finding out a lot about what his career is about to do. As he just advanced up the rock and roll scene, and he was sort of heading to a very big moment. And you could feel that with him. It was very, very exciting to be around the guy because he had this sort of leadership kind of qualities. So he was always up front, and it was nice to follow him. But at the same time, I needed this other cultural stuff, and I thought, well, maybe one day I'll be able to take off and just sort of hit the road myself, which eventually I did, luckily.
Which you did do, and I think you did some time busking too, didn't you?
Yeah, it came into it. A lot of the guys in Croydon at that time, there was a little sort of set of people around these parts. McTell was one of them, Ralph McTell, and one or two other buskers, Tubbs and Bunny and Robin. There was a little gang of these guys who were into France in a way. So, they were kind of avant-garde about things, and they had an angle. Which wasn't pop, but they seemed to be having a great time too, and that I thought I'd join in with that kind of world. So that's where it came from. My sort of near contemporaries, the influence of them was very strong.
Looking back, how ambitious do you think you were in those early days?
Well, I look back at the journals that I was writing in those early days, kind of in about the late 50s and early 60s. It was that there were a lot of angst in there. There was a lot of feeling that I felt inadequate. I couldn't express myself. I just couldn't get anything right. I was a very worried and kind of very emotional young guy. So I never really thought about fame or fortune at that point or anything like that, or making it. I just wanted to get some experience, I think, under my belt, and I felt I needed it. So I had no real ambition as such. And in fact, that's one of my major problems. I'm not a terrifically ambitious for material type of things, which is a bit of a drawback in the pop business.
Yeah.
You need this kind of drive. You need to think, I want the big house in the country. I want, I need huge financing and all that kind of thing. If you don't have that drive, then exactly what are you doing here, kind of thing.
Was there a point in time where you felt your songwriting really began to develop?
I think that after I'd had a fair amount of practice at it, I did a lot of songwriting work, which was a kind of hack work. I'd take 30 or 40 songs from other people, and I'd either write the words for those, for the music, or I'd write the music to other people's words, just for 15 bob or something, or whatever it was, 30 bob at the time. And so I was getting a lot of experience at actually, hacking a song together. But it took a long time, before somebody actually thought, no, that is a good song. And I think really it wasn't until about 1966 or 65 or 66 that people started to think, now it's happening a little bit. So I'd been writing for, like 3 or 4 years before I'd actually got one which I thought was a bit interesting. Sort of of course I was into Dylan and all the modern poets, and of course modern jazz and the comedians of that satirical world and so on. So I had a lot of heroes who I had to live up to. So it took a bit of doing, to get one which I appreciated myself even.
You trekked across and you based yourself in Copenhagen for a while. What was the music scene like there at the time?
Well, I think because it was 1966, the Vietnam War was in there raging, and a lot of freaks from America who were living in Europe at the time, for one reason or another, they were either studying there or they were getting the hell out of America to get away from it all, in a sort of peace-like way. And a lot of them wound up in Copenhagen and other cities in Europe too. So I ran into a scene where the Americans were having a big influence at that time on Danes. And it was a good atmosphere because it was all very open. So anyone, people were welcome at that time in Copenhagen. There was a lot of nice music going on. People of Denmark hadn't closed in to become Danish in a chauvinistic way or anything. It all seemed very open. And it was a nice atmosphere to be hacking away at your songs, really. There were a few folk clubs, and you could play in the street, you could play at the universities. I was living at a sort of university scene anyway, so I was able to play to students all the time, who were sort of contemporaries who were into the same music. So it was very good to be there then.
Were you still based there when Where Do You Go To? Successful?
Yeah. And I'd written that in 1966, in fact, in Copenhagen, and it took 3 years before I was able to get to London to actually start the recording, to make the recording in late '68. So there was a long sort of gap while I was on the folk scene, as it were. But after I'd written Where Do You Go To, I was able to get jobs as a folk singer up alongside a kind of Donovan, Al Stewart, or even Dylan. To be able to get up there and actually rally with them and say, I've got an entire act which, has got a lot of fun in it, and it's also looking at other serious issues, and, so it had all the elements of a folk act. So that's what I wanted to write for myself. That was ambition, I suppose.
Do you recall actually sitting down and writing that song?
Oh, yeah. I recall getting up to the attic where I was actually writing these songs. I'd been writing on a very, very regular sort of all day, every day basis. And it was after one spectacular party in this particular collegium where I lived. Of course, I was in love at the time, and things were really happening. I mean, I was up there completely penniless, but things were wonderful. And after this spectacular party, I went upstairs to the attic again where I lived. I got the guitar out, and suddenly it synthesized for me all these ideas I'd had about a kind of European culture. Marlene Dietrich referring to Berlin in the 20s, and Zizi Jarmer, the Paris of the 50s, and it just seemed to come out in this limerick form, which is a nice and easy form of writing things down, every second line rhyming. So I can recall having a good time writing it, all in one go. I suppose it was like I'd reached my height at that point.
Did you envisage the song being the major single success that it was?
No, I don't think so. No. Because I didn't have any kind of ideas at that time of making a deal with anyone, or I had no conception. I was just thinking to get some influences into me. I wanted to learn a bit more about this, with these people around me. But I knew that it was entertaining, because I could tell from the way, every time I sang it, it was in whatever situation that it was a popular piece of information. So I knew I was onto something.
Yeah.
But I never thought of it as any kind of recording until about a year and a half after I'd written it.
Pressure upon you from the record company after its success to come up with more of the same?
I wouldn't have thought so. They were a very confused bunch, I think, my record company. They were not as firmly established as a record company as some others in the business, and they never had a morale. They didn't have a theme to their roster. They were just looking for success, I think, in one way or another. So it never had any cultural feel to it. So in a way, we were disenchanted with each other. They thought, well, you're not living up to you're not a solo artist the way we see you. They thought I might be some sort of throwback to another era, instead of more like a contemporary of a kind of Cat Stevens. They weren't thinking like that. They weren't futuristic. So we had a lot of problems there with them. So I don't think they, in the end, they just said, well, you do whatever you want, Pete. Was the idea. There wasn't any kind of guidance or anything like that. They were just saying, you do whatever you want.
Yeah, you've remained a well-travelled artist throughout your career. You've alternated between various countries. Has living and experiencing different environments influenced your songwriting at all?
I don't know about influencing the songwriting. That is a kind of lonely, dedicated job. That's about actually finishing off an idea. I mean, obviously, if you're able to get an idea in the first place for a song, that's a wonderful thing, just having the idea, the top line. But then you have to work to complete it. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you're not prepared to do the actual hard graft of finishing the song, it'll never be a song. It'll just be a nice idea. So I've got a huge amount of books filled with lovely ideas, which I never completed. But on the other hand, I've got also like thousands of songs which I have completed on purpose. So I mean, traveling around is really enjoyment. Work is work. In my book, I can't put the two together in a way.
Yeah. So it's just a love of travelling, really, that's seen you move around like that. You haven't gotten restless being in the one place for too long.
Yeah, I need to get out there. It's my enjoyment, to actually wander off and see what's over the rise, see what's over that hill. It's the imagination, I think, is on fire. That's what it is. You always imagine there's going to be something great, or some wonderful experience coming up, or some great music to hear. It may not ever happen, but as long as it's my imagination, that's what kind of drives me on. The actual truth is rather prosaic, of course. But never mind. You always imagine that the next hill is going to show you the truth. What am I saying? But of course, traveling, for instance, you learn a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
You learn about yourself. You get in Australia. I've made a few trips to Australia. 3 trips, and it's been very educational on a whole lot of fronts. So even though I may not enjoy the work as such, I'd rather be just wandering around. The fact that I have to work somewhere is a bit of a bugbear. It worries me. But I can still learn a lot on my travels.
Now, you've had some great musicians on your albums over the years, but in a live situation, I think you've mainly chosen to play solo. Is that a personal choice?
I think it's personal choice on the grounds that the financial arrangements. It really comes down to a budget. If I had Mick Jagger's budget, then of course I could appear with the absolute full Monty. But you have to cut your coat, don't you, according to your cloth there. So it makes it easier for the promoter for me to appear simply myself, or to pick up a band like a local guys or something like this, because it makes the whole thing easier to handle. You don't have to go out on a limb, with me. So it's always worked out that way. It's a kind of compromise, rather than I'm going to do what I want to do on this one. Of course, I'd love to play with as many. There's nothing better than other musicians around. In my book, I'd rather play with others than on my own. But often I have to.
What is the extent of your live work these days?
Well, I'll tell you, John, it's open. It's open to genuine offers of work, basically, so that while I don't actually chase after work, I don't have a profile in that way because I don't have an agent or a manager as such, or a publicist, because I'm hoping the internet will do that for me somehow. So if you don't go chasing after the work, then really you're entirely reliant on others asking you to do something. And it's very rarely that I say no when I am asked. So I leave it at that. Like the last, someone just rang me the other day and said, we're going out on a tour starting in the February 2000 for 76 dates around England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Do you want to join the tour? So I'm thinking about it. 76 dates in a row is that's going to take up about 3 months of, getting around the country.
Yeah.
So I may just do that. On the other hand, I'd like to be playing in the Troubadour in Melbourne if it still exists, but I don't think it does.
No, it's been closed down for a few years now.
Or its equivalent. I'm much happier if I'm playing to 60 people who know exactly what I'm doing, rather than in a theatre of people where they are kind of putting up with me because they're there to see the other 60s acts or something, So, but on the other hand, it's nice to play in a big theatre anyway. But I'm sort of basically still back in the area where I need to get very close to people so that they can see what I'm saying much closer.
Your son is quite an accomplished musician.
Yes, he is. I'm happy to say, Daniel. He's now a teacher of music, which is good, and also drama. But it's unfortunate that he has to teach 16-year-old girls. I said that must be really hard for you, being 24. It's a bit of a drawback having to, and he has to take them abroad. He has to go to Brussels, and he has to go to Tanzania with young women, 16 or 17 of them at a time, and he's got to teach them music and drama. What a hard life. But he's in there slogging away with his own band, of course.
Yeah.
I think he lives in Denmark, and he's got his group, and they're on that trip where they're trying to get a deal with people, and they're trying to, doing more gigs every week and every month or so, and trying to get a profile going. Well, I know the struggle that he's involved in there.
Now let's talk about your most recent album, England's Lane, which I only just heard for the first time last night, and it's quite a strong album. I believe you had a real backlog of songs there to choose from.
Yeah, but by the time we came to actually record, at the time my producer Brian Hodgson was sort of saying to me, "Look, we've got to get in there," and he'd set up the deal. He'd got the musos sorted out. He'd got the studio. He'd got the deal. He said, "Right, send me whatever you think we'll be able to make a choice from." And from 30 odd songs or so, he picked out 12 or 11 or 12 of them. So we were able to get going immediately. It's a nice way to work when someone actually says it's a good idea to go in the studio now, rather than me once again forcing any issues. I don't know. It's a very strange world when you think a record has to be really promoted. In effect, if you really want it to be a success, you've got to get 100% publicity behind it. And if you don't do that, then you're just hoping somehow.
Have you found recording in the 90s different to recording in the 60s?
I think that the process of recording doesn't actually change. It's just the results, and how they're handled. In the 60s, as a young, so a willing young guy, I'm out there to do the promotion, and it all seemed much easier to get involved in that, to get rolling for the promotion. But now it seems harder. The older you get, the less they want you out there in a way, because it's a young man's business. It's a young person's thing. Unless you're aiming for your own people who want your record on their rack, and let's hope they are still there, as far as I'm concerned. Well, if you think Eric Clapton, as the other day, was saying, it's a DJ's world now. They are the superstars. We've had, the focus has changed all through the years of who are the stars of today. Where does the emphasis lie? Now it's the audience, I think, and the DJ who are the audience is now the star, in my book.
When wading through that backlog of songs there, was there a certain criteria used in deciding which songs to put on the album?
I think there was, because I looked at Brian Hodgson, who's the bass player, and, he's in a country band. His band of players are very country-orientated men, which I like, in a certain way myself. I like that genre, and I've got a lot of songs in that field. So I aimed them towards that. Had he been, let's say that if he turned out to be a classical type-minded person, a producer comes along who's very classical and very orchestral, then I'd aim a whole different bunch of songs at that. It really is, you're working with what's on offer at the moment. It would be impossible to do any classical stuff with the lineup we had. The classical music, Whereas now, I've got a friend at the moment has written some very classical music to a novel. He wants to make it into a musical, so I'm working with him, and it's totally different music to any kind of country or rock. It's purely orchestral and very classical, so I'm aiming words in that area now, which is quite interesting to do.
Now, there's a song on the album which I guess you could call a sequel to Where Do You Go To?
Yeah.
Did you consciously sit down to write that as a sequel, or was it apparent to you after you'd got into writing it?
No. I've been looking to update her in a way and say, what would this person, I just asked myself, what would she be like 33 years after you've written about her in the first place? So just to see how much I might know. Do I know anything about the world of fashion anymore? Did I ever know anything? Do I know, any sort of witty, upper class type things? And what is she like now? So in this song, it was a conscious effort to bring her up to date, this Marie Claire type. And so it appears in the song. Somehow you've delayed the aging process, it says there. So, this is a very current theme, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
To be able to delay the aging process. And so she does that. And she's now, instead of San Moritz, she's in Gstaad and Colorado. And she's in Cape Town and Rio de Janeiro. So I'm kind of updating that person.
Have you found, as you've gotten older, songwriting has got easier? Or is it still a struggle?
I wouldn't say it's a struggle as such. In theory, one should be able to, it ought to be easier. But now you've got a lot more choices. I've learned a lot more about music over the years. I've done a lot more reading. I've widened everything, my vocabulary, my imagination, everything. I've educated the whole lot. So I have a lot more choices now. And it makes it, instead of just being simple and going straight to the point, I have so many options to pick from. And that is the difficulty of, being able to be your own editor and be able to, stick it down. So it's a confusion, but it's a nice kind of confusion, I think.
Yeah.
I feel confident when I sit down to do something. If someone gives, when I have a task, I've learned how to complete that thing in some way. Yes, in fact, I've improved. I'm a lot happier with myself as well. So that the songs are not so angled at young man's anguish songs, which a lot of my early stuff was. The base of the pyramid with a lot of anguish in there, and I'm wondering what I'm going to do next, and how am I going to survive in this world? Am I good enough? Lack of self-esteem was written all over my early stuff. But now I'm a little more selective about what I actually write down.
Now, I know England's Lane's been out for a while now, so is there another record in the works at all?
Well, I've got a few plans. I'm slightly disenchanted with the entire idea of actually making records as such. I mean, not songwriting or putting ideas together, but the process of recording and actually trying to release them in a traditional way. It all seems it's slightly daunting at the moment. I think there must be another way, and I rather like this idea of getting straight into people's homes through the computers, being able to be involved in those who are interested, and myself through the internet or whatever, through a website which I'm setting up and so on. So at the moment, instead of thinking about how am I going to make my next record, I mean, I'm going to try to think about how I can organize those people who are already interested in me and bringing them together. So I've got my audience kind of labeled. So this is very intriguing, rather than the old knocking of the head against the brick walls, which the record companies, obviously, who needs 57-year-old guys coming in with songs? What they need is young guys ready to be exploited.
Yeah.
Who are a part of the exploitation of their own thing. So I think that's what happens. You get to know too much, about the business, and therefore you're not that useful to the powers that be.
Okay, Peter. Well,
all right, John.
I want to let you go. I want to thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been a treat speaking to you. Congratulations on the album, and we look forward to more.
Thank you very much for calling.
And I hope it's not too long before we get to see you down our way again.
Absolutely.
It's been a few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. But I'm hoping to come over for the Olympic Games.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, so it won't be till next year. Good.
Okay.
Okay, John.
Thanks again, Peter. Take care.
Right. You too, man. Thanks for calling.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.